Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on ethical considerations of generative AI. We're going to be focusing on things that you'll want to ask about the tools that you plan to use. Today, we'll be covering a brief AI demo with Microsoft Copilot and an actual D2L quiz. And then we're going to provide some different questions and ways of evaluating AI tools from ethical lenses, along with a few examples to model how you might take one of these topics and bring into your own discipline to work on with students, followed by a quick discussion. And please take note, we're not philosophers. We did consult with one who gave us his stamp of approval for our direction with this. So we want to apologize up front for any mistakes we make. We're going to do our best.
So for the demo, I selected Edge and Microsoft's Copilot tool because these things are available to us here at Westchester using our Westchester credentials to get into them. And that's because we already have licenses with Microsoft for other Microsoft tools. These are easy for you to experiment with if you are interested in doing so. What I'm about to demonstrate, though, can be done with other generative AI tools, not just this one that I'm showing you. This is also a good time to remind you that the university has not officially endorsed any AI products or tools. And a special thanks to Tia Malkin-Fontecchio for letting us use her quiz in this demonstration. So Tia had a 10-question quiz in D2L that uses a mix of question types, and I'm taking it in the Edge browser, which has the AI Copilot built directly into it, so I don't have to jump between tabs. I can leave the AI Copilot open while taking the quiz and toggle it on and off as needed. Now, when I highlighted the text of the question, a very normal operation that can occur for a number of non-cheating reasons, I'm prompted in the list of options with something that lets me select Copilot directly. Now, notice that Copilot is providing a full and rich explanation. It's not just answering the question. I can quickly skim those results, and it's starting over here, showing you again. I click on Copilot, I highlight that text, and I right-click, and oh, look, I can select Copilot right away. Ask Copilot, and it's going to start doing that. So while that runs through the explanation again, if I was a student, I could read that full explanation to get some understanding of what's going on with the question. And even though that feels a little like cheating, there is still some educational opportunity sitting in that if a student wanted to take it. In this particular instance, the AI got this question right. It was a true-false question, though, so the AI had a 50-50 chance. So let's move on to a multiple choice question. This time, I'm going to demonstrate how you can copy and paste the question into the chat area, and I will just briefly tighten it up as I've kind of fixed the formatting. But that shows, too, that a student could change the prompt a little bit if they needed to. Again, Copilot's going to provide a lot of extra content to get to the right answer, but spoiler alert, it does actually get to the right answer. It is successful. So far, Copilot is 2 for 2 on this quiz. Now, once that's done there, we're going to move on to the next question. This is another multiple choice question, but this one, the AI doesn't come back with the exact right answer. I have to read what it says and kind of make an educated guess. Part of what makes this question a little harder is that it's referencing a specific author. And if that author is not very robustly in the data that the AI can draw on, it's not going to be as effective in answering the question. Now, I could prompt the AI again with a slightly different version of the question to see if it could help me. I didn't do that in this example, but I could do that. And given what it gave me, I was still able to answer the question correctly. 3 for 3. All right, what about a multiple choice question that has an all of the above in it? Well, guess what? Can get those right too. If we give this a minute, Copilot will start generating again, and it will go through each explanation, kind of saying like, okay, this seems to be correct, this seems to be correct, this seems to be correct, so that means it must be the all of the above. And we'll give it just a second to let it finish doing that. And there it says all of the above. AI is rolling right along. And our last demonstration here, this is a different type of question. Tia used a written short response question in her exam. These questions are harder to automatically grade, not impossible, just harder. And the AI does have a harder time answering this question correctly. partly because the question is asking students to reference material directly from the course, which the AI is most definitely not going to have access to. However, the response I gave is in the ballpark. It's certainly in the realm of possible, but it's not the specific right tool. So we do this demonstration to just kind of highlight how AI tools are shaking the foundations of assessment just a little bit and are forcing us to at least reevaluate what we're doing and why we're doing it, at least have some of those thoughts. And so that leads us into this quote about what is our role as educators to help students. And as one of your colleagues, Andy Famiglietti, says, he believes that it's important for us to help students learn to critically evaluate these generative AI tools. And one of the ways you can do that is to explore the ethical questions that we're going to look at today in your course as they relate to your disciplinary contexts.
And to that point, we just want to remind you that we think generative AI tools should not be ignored. Previous ed tech tools had fairly clear definitions on what they could or could not do. Generative AI tools, however, don't have that same clarity. These tools have a lot of capabilities that have not been defined or identified yet.
So this post that I saw from John Nash, and I know John, I've been on a couple podcasts with him, I think highlights some of the positive ways that ethics can help us get at that critical understanding. And I'm going to read the 4 points there. First, they encourage perspective shifts. When we talk about ethics, they help us shape future AI use in education, and they help us refine our teaching methods. Another thing is that when we talk about ethics in AI, the disagreements that come up and the sharing of ethical insights can help us all go deeper in our understanding. And then third, conversations about ethics help to validate individual values and identities and can help foster some kindness and service to others. And finally, they reinforce the idea that we are all learners in the AI journey, and they highlight our collective responsibility in shaping AI's role in education. So now let's get into 10 different ethical considerations you can think about as you evaluate different AI tools. And the first up is bias. The tools have the bias of the data that they are trained on. And as Leon Furzy, I think it's Furzy, I hope it's Furzy, says, the data used to train AI systems reflects the biases and prejudices of society, resulting in discriminatory outputs. And another quote he has, indiscriminately scraping the internet for data means that the data set can contain racist, sexist, ableist, and otherwise discriminatory language. So here's an example. When a generative AI image tool is asked to generate a scientist, look at what it came up with. What do you notice about all those images? There's certain cultural trends in play in what it comes up with. As Sasha Luconi says in an AI talk that she gave, significant representation of whiteness and masculinity came up across all 150 professions that they looked at, even when compared to the real world. So I would say that if your data is not very good, it isn't going to do a good job of representing the diversity of our world. There is a bias in the responses that come back. UNESCO says that better than I can. Because these vectors are built from the way humans use words, they end up reflecting many of the biases that are present in human language. And they also tend to have a Western bend if they're built from data that's coming from Western uses of the internet. Now, again, your WCU colleague, Andy Famiglietti, did an experiment where he tried to generate 50 short satirical articles about college writing. And in those responses, he saw a lot of uses of the word Johnsons, Thompsons, Stevensons, and Watsons mentioned with an occasional Ramirez. And he points out that there's some bias coming through in those naming conventions that the AI tools and their pattern identifying ability is picking up on and reusing in the responses. If you're interested in learning more about what Annie did, we can share with you the links of his blog post about his experiment. And here's another example from a health standpoint of how different components of bias can come into play across the usage cycle of an AI tool. First, if you have that discriminatory data, then impacts the design and deployment of AI tools, which then have an unjust application, an unfair application when they're used in certain settings, which then lead to real world disparities in health outcomes, which then feed the data. And we have this nasty loop of bias that's not helping anyone. And I really worry about any tool that says they're using data for predictive analytics if they're not also talking about how they're taking efforts and steps to remove the discrimination and bias from said data. Second item of ethical considerations is the environment. Generative AI use comes at a cost in terms of energy, materials needed to create the servers and the server farms that run these tools, and the water that's needed both to generate the power that they need and to keep cool the data centers where they run. Now, we've already done a whole separate presentation on environmental considerations of generative AI, and they are substantial to think about. I would encourage you to check that out. These impacts are definitely more nuanced than what some of the current media portrayals make it seem. And there's a lot of speculation based on trends, and I don't think those trends will hold true. But there are environmental costs to using these tools, and you can explore those with your students as they relate to your specific discipline.
Next, we have our third consideration, truth. You'll want to consider if the tool you're using is reliable. So we have this quick Venn diagram here to take a quick look at how falseness and the intent to harm can overlap. So disinformation is content that is intentionally false and designed to cause harm. When disinformation is shared, it often turns into misinformation. And then finally, we have malinformation that describes the genuine information that is shared with an intent to cause harm. And we're going to look at some examples of how the truth and reality can sometimes be muddied up with AI tools. So we have
So,
two sound.
sorry,
Okay,
Madison, jumping
you're
in.
fine.
Go ahead. Go
Tom's
ahead.
going to play the sounds. We have two sound bites from Jimmy, John, and Seth from the Strike Force 5 podcast. We're going to play all six in a row, see if you can figure out which one is the real voice and which one is the AI generated voice. Take it away, Tom.
Okay. So here's our first one from Jimmy Kimmel.
Hold on a second. How did you do this?
And here is our second one from Jimmy Kimmel.
I will drink to that as always. Please drink responsibly.
Okay, so see, as you think, which one do you think was AI and which one do you think was the real voice? Here's our first example from Oliver, John Oliver.
We have another great sponsor on for today's show.
And here is the second John Oliver.
Like any experiment with AI, it's fun for a second, and then there's just this chilling sensation of.
And I'm going to play that again since we got my Outlook ding.
Like any experiment with AI, it's fun for a second, and then there's just this chilling sensation of.
And here's our first example from Seth Meyers.
Heard my wife having a conversation with me.
And here is the second example from Seth Meyers.
Some fun facts for you whiskey fans out there.
All right, so make your guesses. Here we go. We're about to reveal.
So the images that are still highlighted are real. A for Jimmy was real. B is real for John Oliver, and A is real for Seth Meyers. And Stephen Colbert used an AI generation tool to create the script that was read for this. Here's a good example of some AI-generated disinformation that we'll probably start seeing a lot over the next couple of months. This was an AI-generated image to spread misinformation. It's a completely fake image. It didn't actually happen. And there was also a diabetic cookbook created recently that was just flat out wrong. And a hospital ordered it and gave it out to diabetic patients.
So our fourth ethical consideration is copyright. And there's kind of two pieces to this that we're going to think about. So to train these models, the original AI creating companies used what was out there on the internet. It was freely available on the net. So that means they can use it for anything, right? Well, if you've been paying any attention to copyright and fair use, that's not as clear cut as these AI companies make it seem. It could be a copyright violation. And there's some court cases currently going on trying to figure this out. And it'll be very interesting to see how these cases play out in the courts. For example, the New York Times is suing the company that made ChatGPT, OpenAI, because OpenAI used their content without permission. And OpenAI says, well, that's fair use because we're not getting in the way of your business model, and it was available for us to grab and incorporate. Whereas New York Times is saying, yes, it can impact our business model, which means it is violating our copyright. You need to pay us for that use. So it's really not clear by any means how the copyright of the data and its use in training is going to play out in the court system. So that's one aspect of copyright. The second is who owns what is created by a generative AI tool. Some recent findings have said that AI-generated material cannot be copyrighted because it's not made by a human being. But where it gets really interesting is where's the line drawn if a human intervenes and starts to make changes on something that was generated by a generative AI tool. This is another area that I think we'll eventually see court cases having to settle and resolve as we go forward with these new tools.
Next up is our fifth consideration, privacy concerns. So what data is the tool you're using collecting? This is another quote from Leon that explains how personal data collection has kind of been a longstanding problem. These models need a massive amount of data to be trained on, so they're constantly collecting personal information, and a lot of it is without your consent or knowledge. So it's important to note that data breaches and cyber attacks are also a huge risk for AI systems. And then again, it's important to keep in mind that the AI models don't have intelligence. They're just reporting back facts, and they might get those facts wrong at the end of the day. A good example of this is something that happened to a mayor in Australia last year. He was a whistleblower and alerted the police about bribery in a company, and ChatGPT actually described him as a guilty party. So situations like these open the door for possible legal action, just as Tom was saying, for defamation. And then next up, we have our sixth consideration, datafication, and what is collected and how is it being used. Again, Leon says that basically datafication is a term used to describe how all aspects of our lives are getting turned into data points. We're constantly creating data every day. Every time we talk on the phone, send a text, use social media, withdraw from an ATM, or even walk past a security camera, our data is being collected. The data collected is sometimes used to create better decision-making in the future. For example, you might be familiar with this. The more you watch YouTube videos, the better your recommendation videos will be, or so they say. Tom and I have argued on this. And then next up, datafication also brings us to the topic of worsening digital poverty. According to UNESCO, the possibility to create and control generative AI is out of reach for most companies in most countries, especially those in the global south. As access to data becomes increasingly essential for the economic development of countries and for the digital opportunities of individuals, those countries and people who do not have access to or cannot afford enough data are left in a situation of data poverty. The current ChatGPT models are trained on data from online users, which reflect the values and norms of the global north, making them inappropriate for locally relevant AI algorithms in data-poor communities in many parts of the global south or in more disadvantaged communities in the global north. Next up, we have our seventh consideration, affect recognition. So what is this? It's basically a subfield of AI, also known as emotion recognition. It analyzes various cues like facial expressions, body language, and speech patterns to detect emotion. It aims to classify emotions into categories, but there's a lot of controversy surrounding this idea that we're going to get into. So emotion recognition tools that have been criticized by experts in the past. There's controversy for years over whether there is a set of universal facial expressions or not. Some people say that it's unscientific to equate external displays of emotion with internal feelings. We have our eighth consideration, human labor. And then it's important to consider what the work environment is like for the employees of these tools. And it's easy to forget that there are actually employees behind these AI systems working. Currently, there are millions of workers globally that are staffed to feed and label information for these databases. It's extremely tedious work with unreliable pay and few opportunities for growth. One of the most famous stories of this is from November 2021. OpenAI began the process of creating a safety system. They sent tens of thousands of snippets of text to an outsourcing firm in Kenya called SAMA. The text was pulled from various internet sources, including extremely harmful content describing graphic situations of abuse, murder, self-harm, and more. SAMA is a San Francisco-based company that employs workers in Kenya, Uganda, and India to label data for Silicon Valley clients like Google, Meta, and Microsoft. And while it brands itself as an ethical AI company and boasts of lifting over 50,000 people out of poverty, there are concerning elements surrounding its operations. The data labelers that we just mentioned were earning around $1.32 to $2 an hour. And it's definitely an interesting read. You can check out more in the Time magazine article linked here. And moving on to our ninth consideration, power. So how do these tools and companies exercise power? So looking at the topic of hegemony, it is the dominance of one group over others in society. And it often manifests itself through the perpetuation of cultural norms, beliefs, and values that serve the interest of the dominant group in a society. So an example of this would be the expansion of fast food chains around the globe, like McDonald's. It spreads the norms of a Western dietary habit and lifestyle. Another popular example would be how Hollywood impacts global entertainment. Hegemony influences politics, economy, and social norms. So when we look at AI through this lens, we can start to see how these powerful technologies can be used to reinforce hegemonic structures. The topic of power really weaves together a lot of the previous points that we talked about with bias, sustainability, and privacy concerns. Moving on, we have this quick little table just to illustrate how in recent decades, new tech has altered the nature of power in society twice. So we had old power, and then we moved into new power, and now we're kind of in an auto-sapient era. And just to briefly describe this, first, the internet and social media gave rise to new power. Old power was when one small group contained all the information and they passed it down. Social media and the internet gave way for anyone to spread information and disinformation online. And now we face another re-centralization of the flow of information in large part because of the filtering roles that AI-powered tools are going to play.
So our final consideration is plagiarism. And I think it's relevant that we have the tagline, is it even relevant to the discussion? We pulled both of these quotes from a fascinating piece by Eaton that explores how we might be in what is termed a post-plagiarism world. So take a second to read both of those quotes. So Eaton identifies, I think it's 7 different points, and we'll go a little more in depth on the first and the last and then share the others in the middle. But this first point is that we're well on our way to hybrid writing, where you have a mix of computer and human writing coming together. And so it's pretty difficult right now to determine where one stops and the other begins. And to ask ourselves, what is an appropriate mix? These AI tools are getting more sophisticated, not less. They're being incorporated into our processing tools. And detection is getting harder and harder with higher risks of false accusations. And so it really starts to beg the question of what is plagiarism in that environment? The other piece, as these Gen AI tools become more sophisticated, opportunities for human creativity are enhanced. And it gets, if the AI tool can help with some basic skills, which you can get down faster, it opens the door to get into more complex things more quickly, to get to that creativity faster. The third point there, which I think we're already starting to see happen, is that language barriers are going to disappear as these AI tools make it easy to get translation in real time when you're talking with someone. And I think point number 4 is really key. Even though we're using these tools, we as humans don't relinquish the responsibility for the product that is created, even though we're relinquishing some control in the creation process. And that's tied in with this next point, point 5, where attribution is still going to remain really important. Where are those ideas coming from? How are you bringing them into the process? How are you connecting them with the writing that you're doing or the image creation that you're doing? And finally, as Eaton is arguing with the quotes that we showed you to open this section, historical definitions of plagiarism are no longer applicable in the same way that the ideas that we lean on now for copyright and plagiarism didn't really come about until the printing press was generated. And that new technological innovation really changed the way in which we saw and operated. And the last point, a point that's kind of looking forward, and a really great question to think about is, what's going to happen to our academic integrity considerations when students are going to have access to digital technology via things that are not going to be detectable? I mean, the neural link in your brain piece is pretty crazy to think about. I mean, but there's a company working on that right now. And I think about too, in sci-fi, the contact lens that can give you information. You as an instructor are not necessarily going to be able to pick up on that. And we are moving in that direction. We're not there yet, but it's something to keep in mind as we're thinking about how these changes are impacting us. So to recap, we had these 10 points: bias, environment, truth, copyright, privacy concerns, datafication, affect recognition, human labor, power, plagiarism. You don't need to cover all of these in your class. But if one of these has a good relevance to your course and your context, it's an entryway point to have some of the conversations about the ethics around AI and AI use. We would encourage you, as a way of helping to build literacy, to pick one that you think might be relevant, do some additional exploration, maybe talk to your instructional designer to get some ideas, and then engage with students on that topic. So we want to thank you for listening, and we're going to open it up for discussion at this point.